All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, everyone, it is election fantasy week here in D.C. The city is going into lockdown mode as it braces for new mass protests stoked by the president. Shops around here are all boarded up. Certain streets are closed off completely, and there is a very heavy police presence. Now, it's easy to be outraged about the cynical and baseless rejection of election results and the throwing of gasoline on the flames of American tribalism, and I am, in fact, outraged over those things. But I confess, I'm also kind of enjoying watching people squirm, evade, and completely reveal the depths of their depravity through all of this. In fact, there's been a variety of approaches on display from Republicans to stop the steal. I went through them a bit yesterday, but I think it is worth fleshing them out in greater depth and detail so that we can preserve and record for posterity all of the many varied ways in which Washington Republicans have covered themselves in glory. First, you got the actually good guys. Few brave souls like Tom Cotton, Pat Toomey, Chip Roy not only acknowledged reality, but they did so publicly and they did so forcefully. They have accepted the ire of the president and the MAGA base and potentially put their own political futures in jeopardy. It shouldn't require courage to acknowledge the obvious facts in front of us, but it actually did, and they deserve some real credit for that. After this group, however, you have a rapid descent into the circles of Stop the Steal hell. I've ordered them in terms of egregiousness, different flavors and levels of Washington Republican debasement and shame. So here we go. First up is the Silence is Consent caucus. They're not actually going along with Stop the Steal, nor are they saying a single word in objection to it whatsoever. Somewhere buried deep down in their curdled souls still exists the possibility of a moral compass, but they are also cucks at heart. Too cowardly to actually do something remotely courageous, so they just hide out and hope that no one asks them any tough questions. There are many members who fall into this camp, including apparently not only Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, but every single Republican member from South Florida. Both Rubio and Scott have just flat out refused to say what they're planning to do this week. You can find this group hiding, cowering, and rejecting all media requests. Next, you've got the people who are actually dumb enough to buy that Hugo Chavez rigged the election from the grave and Republican Governor Brian Kemp was paid off by George Soros or whatever. Now, it can be tough to draw a hard line here between those who are truly dumb enough to believe and those who are just cynically pretending to be dumb enough to believe. But some cases are pretty clear-cut. I present to you Congressman Louie Gohmert. Here he is laying down some brilliant wisdom on just how he ended up contracting coronavirus.
It is interesting, and I don't know about everybody, but when I have a mask on, I'm moving it to make it comfortable, and I can't help but wonder if that, puts some germs in the mask. If keep your hands off your mask, but anyway, who knows?
Insightful stuff. Now, Gohmert has led the charge with a lawsuit that was too ridiculous even for Mike Pence to go along with, which was, of course, promptly rejected by a federal court. Gohmert hasn't handled this defeat particularly well and seems earnestly perplexed by the situation.
There are people all over the country praying that people will get a backbone. And so, as John Quincy Adams said, the work is ours, the results up to God. So we will keep laboring and working and trying to do everything we can to see that people come to the right conclusion. Because I'm telling you, Emerald, if they do not, it will mean the end of our republic, the end of this little experiment, self-government.
No, it will not. Now, it is an open question whether Trump himself falls into this category. Does he really actually believe all of this nonsense, high on a cocktail of ego, narcissism, and self-delusion? Or is he just cynically weaponizing it to create the trademark chaos that he always so successfully uses? The world may never know. Now, I'm kind of torn as to which of the final two flavors of election denialism are actually more egregious. It's a close call. But next in the lineup, I've placed the people who know damn well the election wasn't stolen, but they are still happy to embrace the wildest nonsense imaginable in service of their own political ambitions and with hopes of getting a nice tweet from Donald Trump. We'll call them the Kraken Caucus. Utterly without shame, people like Matt Gaetz and Rudy Giuliani will tell Trump and his devoted fans absolutely every fever swamp madness that oozes across their Twitter feed.
I still believe that President Trump got an overwhelming majority of the votes of the people who actually showed up and voted in person. And I think it's not a coincidence that the farther you get away from a human being showing up in person to vote, the higher Joe Biden's margins got. It was always the votes that were in the mail or that came in the last day or the last final few days that seemed to give Joe Biden margins that would make Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad blush.
Now, These types are characterized by their utter lack of self-respect for themselves or for the Trump supporters they view as rubes, who they're happy to simultaneously placate with heaping doses of election fraud copium and whip up into paroxysms of terror about the end of the republic. But somehow managing to be even worse than these charlatans are those who are desperately trying to put a dignified intellectual sheen on what is just an outright con job. They're trying to feed you shit and pretend it's pate. Now, Sagar has aptly dubbed them the highbrow stop the steal crowd. They are smart. They 100% know that there is literally nothing to all of these bogus claims. And what's more, everyone can tell that they 100% know there is nothing to these claims. They aren't fooling a single soul. But they've dredged down every tattered constitutional analysis and dreadful esoteric historical precedent they can muster in order to justify what is really just a brazen attempt to overturn an election result. Although, to be fair, and this is the other part of the con, none of them actually believe they have any shot whatsoever of changing the election results. This group thinks very highly of their vast intellects, would ideally like to maintain some shred of dignity, but are also utterly cynical political actors willing to do whatever it takes to have a shot in the next Republican presidential primary and, by the way, rake in some fundraising cash in the meantime. They aren't saying the election was stolen. They're just asking questions, dedicated to getting to the truth. And in any case, haven't you heard about the Tilden Hayes Compromise of 1876?
I'm going to pin you down on what you're trying to do. You know, are you trying to say that as of January 20th, that President Trump will be president?
Well, that depends on what happens on Wednesday. I mean, this is why we have the debate.
No, it
This is
doesn't.
why
I mean,
we
the
have the
states,
votes.
by the Constitution, say they certify the election. They did certify it. By the Constitution, Congress doesn't have the right to overturn the certification, at least as most experts read it.
Well, Congress is directed under the 12th Amendment to count the electoral votes. There's a statute that dates back to the 1800s, rather, 19th century, that says that there is a right to object, there's a right to be heard, and there's also a certification
Right,
process.
that's for me.
Now, these smarty pants have somehow managed to stake out the worst possible position, publicly debasing themselves, but fooling absolutely no one. They've taken enough half measures to lose their dignity, but not gone far enough to actually derive any electoral benefit. What a country, where the race to the bottom is apparently the only game in town. Sagar, it's been very interesting to watch. Obviously, I wish none of this was happening.
Depressing.
It's terrible for Republicans all the way around and terrible for the country as well.
Yeah.
But it has been interesting to see how people have revealed themselves through this process.
Yeah, sure. And I think, look, I'm not above cynical moves in order to win power, but they need to be smart. And I'm like, at least be smart about it. Right? And I'm just like, look, this is not going to work out the way that you think it is going to work out.
Right.
And I've said this over and over again. Many of them just think that the short-term hit for the fundraising or the Fox hits and elsewhere, I'm like, that's not how it's going to play out long-term. Look at what just happened in Georgia. The suburban realignment has completely been accelerated with those voters, and many of the working class voters or minority voters and others who either stayed home or turned out for Trump in the 2020 election did not come out for Perdue and for Loeffler. Now, they're not coming out, many of those people, they were not coming out for Stop the Steal. We all know this, right? So you're trying to do is keep on to this part of the Trump base. But in terms of trying to win, actually win elections in your home state, I think they're going to be in big trouble whenever it comes to a presidential primary. And let's say you even do eventually win the Republican presidential primary. Well, now you're sitting on a grievance-oriented minority party. What is going to happen with that? How are you going to win even an electoral college victory in Pennsylvania or Georgia or Arizona or Wisconsin? Again, if they had leaned into any of the more popular parts of their agenda, then yeah, they might actually win. But now I really fear that this will be a stain on them for a long time. People say that about everything in Washington, so it's one of those things where when you say it, I think you really need to mean it and mean it analytically. I actually think this one will stick with suburban. People are going to be like, you know, you tried to decertify an election. Like, that actually is something which is going to stick. And we know that this is not a majoritarian position. It's not majoritarian in any way. And yeah, so that's this. They have put themselves in a situation trying to pander to the Trump base. And as you said, it only works if you're willing to go one way, with the Matt Gaetz way,
right,
or the Louis Gohmert way.
Right.
That's it.
Well, and here's the thing: is like, you know, walking to work this morning. We work very close to the White House here. Lots of people streaming into town to go to the Stop the Steal rally and protest and whatever. The thing that pisses me off is like, you know, ordinary people are very busy with their lives, right? And so the way a lot of times that they consume information is they have people or news outlets that they trust.
Yes.
And they rely on them to like sort out the world for them and tell them what's really going on. And so if you're a person who has a position of power and who has people who really have placed their trust and their faith in you, and you're willing to just outright lie to them and treat them, I mean, that's a real way of treating them with contempt and condescension, treating them like they're dumb rubes who you feel happy to like toy with their emotional lives in whatever way serves your interests. That to me is just utterly disgusting. And that's what really gets me and pisses me off about this whole thing.
I could not agree more. And I'll never blame people, you know, for the beliefs that they hold and more. It's always upon leaders and others to convince people otherwise. And this is something I closed my radar with this yesterday, but Yuval Levin put it so well.
Yeah, he did.
Lying to people is no way to speak for them or represent them. It is a way of showing contempt for them and of using them rather than being useful to them. And I think that is perfectly and extraordinarily well said. And because he says, what too many Republican politicians are choosing to do is they have decided to feign anger at a problem that cannot be solved because it does not exist. And this cannot help but make them less capable of taking up real problems on behalf of their voters.
Yep.
I couldn't agree more.
Just using people. That's what's really going on. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.